Alright, this is one of my favorite topics. In this video, we're going to be looking at pseudo-classes. We'll be discussing what are pseudo-classes, state pseudo-classes, and conditional pseudo-classes. Grab your popcorn, the show's about to start. So what are pseudo-classes? Pseudo-classes define styles for a specific state or condition of an HTML element. So what do we mean by state or condition? Let's look at state first. An example of a state of an HTML element would be something like a button. At the moment, the button is green, but if I were to hover over this button, it turns purple. This is an example of state, where we can define styles for different states. Like we saw the button was green when our cursor was not hovering over it, whereas it turned purple when we did hover over it. Let's now look at condition. This would be something like in a table. We could style every odd row to be purple, like rows 1 and 3 here, and every even row to be white, like rows 2 and 4 here. We're using a condition of odd and even numbers to style the table. So let's now have a look at how we write pseudo-classes in CSS. A pseudo-class is a keyword with a colon added to the end of a selector. Let's have a look at an example of an anchor tag. We're using the type selector here to select all anchor tags. We then add a colon and add the specific pseudo-class name, in this case hover. This combination of colon and pseudo-class name gives us a pseudo-class. So let's first take a look at the state pseudo-classes. These pseudo-classes are very important. So state pseudo-classes are about dynamic styling based on user interaction and commonly used for hyperlinks. Now I know the term pseudo-class can seem intimidating, but honestly, the most common use case for them is for hyperlinks, and we're going to be spending some time on it now. So don't freak out, just stick with me. There are 4 different pseudo-classes we can apply to our hyperlinks. The first is the link pseudo-class. This targets anchor tags that have not yet been visited. So in other words, it's simply an anchor tag you haven't clicked yet. The next pseudo-class is the visited pseudo-class. This targets anchor tags that have been visited. You've probably had an experience with this already, where oftentimes a link you've previously clicked on that you revisit will now be purple. This happens in Google searches all the time. So the visited pseudo-class will target anchor tags that you have visited, and the link pseudo-class targets anchor tags that haven't yet been clicked. Now these 2 pseudo-classes are specific to anchor tags. You can't use them anywhere else. The next pseudo-class is the hover pseudo-class. This targets an element when the cursor is placed over it. It's like what we saw in the start, how the button turned from green to purple. That would be using a hover pseudo-class. The last pseudo-class is the active pseudo-class. This targets an element when it is being clicked. So this pseudo-class is specifically targeting when the element is actually being clicked. Oftentimes, you won't even notice the active pseudo-class, because clicking an element might only last a few milliseconds. These 2 pseudo-classes are not specific to anchor tags. You can use them on other elements. So let's go play around with these in VS Code. So in VS Code, I've created a new folder called pseudo-class. I've added an index.html with the HTML boilerplate, and I've linked a style sheet called app.css. In the index.html, let's go add an anchor tag. We'll give it the anchor text click here. And for the href attribute, I'm just going to point it to Google's homepage. Jumping into the app.css file, we're going to style the anchor tag with those 4 different pseudo-classes. Let's first do the link pseudo-class. This pseudo-class was about when the anchor tag had not yet been visited. Let's give this a color of blue. Next up, we'll do the visited pseudo-class. This styles the anchor tag once it has been visited. Let's give it a color of red. The next pseudo-class was the hover pseudo-class. This will style the anchor tag when the cursor is placed over it. Let's give it a color of green. And the final pseudo-class was the active pseudo-class. And this targets the element when it is being clicked. Let's give this a color of yellow. Alright, let's go play around with this in the browser. Alright, I'm on the index.html file and I've zoomed in quite a bit, just so we can see what's going on. You can see straight away the hyperlink is blue. That's this style here. It's an anchor tag we have not yet clicked. If I now hover over it, you can see it turns green. and that's the hover pseudo class coming into play. I'm now going to click on it, but I'm not going to let go of my mouse because I want you to see the active pseudo class in play. So right now I'm holding my mouse down, but I'm not letting go. And you can see the active pseudo class, yellow, is coming into play. I'm now going to let go, so it clicks the link. Okay, so we've now clicked the link. Let's head back to the page. So now you can see the link is no longer blue, it's red. And that's because I've clicked the link. So this pseudo class is coming into play, visited. So let's now look at some state pseudo class guidance. It is best practice to style the pseudo classes of anchor tags instead of styling the anchor element directly. So let's have a look at what I mean by first looking at what is considered bad practice. Bad practice is simply using the type selector to select the anchor tag and apply styles directly. This is considered bad practice because we're not styling the different states the anchor tags can be. On the other hand, good practice is styling all the different pseudo classes for the anchor tag. This approach covers all states. So our CSS would look something like this. We'd first style the linked and visited pseudo class, for example, with the color blue. And you'll note these are actually grouped together, which is very common. It's because it isn't that common to separately style your visited pseudo class. You usually want it to adopt the same styling as just the regular link. So that's why we group these together. We then add styling rules for the hover and active pseudo classes. For example, we'll give it the color dark blue. And again, you'll notice these are grouped. And that's because we often don't really care about the subtlety of the active state, because in practice, you only see it for a few milliseconds when you click the link. So we just want to style it the same as the hover state, and that's why we group them together. This structure of styling the link and visited pseudo classes together and the hover and active pseudo classes together is incredibly common. And we take this same approach when styling a button class. For example, this would be considered bad practice, just styling the button, whereas this would be considered good practice, styling the button class pseudo class of link, visited, hover, and active. Now that can seem like a bit of a mouthful. We're targeting the pseudo class of a class, but it is common and don't let it intimidate you. At the end of the day, our BTN class is targeting an anchor tag. So don't let the pseudo class on a class thing throw you off. We're just targeting an anchor tag with the class name BTN. In the next video, we'll be implementing this approach for pseudo classes on our buttons, so make sure to check it out to see this in practice. Let's have a quick look at conditional pseudo classes. Conditional pseudo classes are generally less important. I'm not really going to be using them at all in the bootcamp, but I just want to show you that they exist and how they work. Conditional pseudo classes are styling based on an element's position in relation to other elements. For example, we could have the pseudo class first-child, which targets the first-child element in a list. We have the last-child pseudo class, which targets the last-child element. And there's also the nth-child pseudo class, which targets child elements based on their position. In this case, every nth child. Now, some common places you may see conditional pseudo classes include on lists, like I've done here, or in tables, where you'd be targeting the TR element, the table row. For example, to get alternating colors for table rows, which helps with table readability. Let's jump into VS Code and play around with these conditional pseudo classes. I'm back in the pseudo class folder over here, and I've cleared out the index.html file and our app.css file from when we were playing around with state pseudo classes. In index.html, I'm going to go add an unordered list. I'm going to create 6 list items by typing li times 6, and I'm just going to give each list item a number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Jumping over to our app.css file, let's grab a list item and select the first child pseudo class, and let's make it the color red. So this will style our first list item red. Let's then grab the list element again and add the last child pseudo class. Let's give this a color of blue. Let's check this out in the browser. Okay, I'm just going to zoom in a bit so we can see this more clearly. You can see that our first list item is now red, and our last list item is blue. So if I now were to go add another list item, let's say the number 7, you'll see that the blue color is now applied to 7. It's always targeting the last child of the list. And the same thing here, if I go add the number 0 and refresh, you'll see that the first child is always targeting the first list item, which is now 0. I'm going to remove these styles. Let's now play around with the nth-child pseudo-class. The way this works is we need to specify something inside these brackets. For now, I'm just going to pick the number 3, and this will simply target the third element. Let's go and give that a color of green, and I'll refresh the browser, and you'll see the third list item, which is now number 2, is green. But we can use this as a bit of a formula, where, for example, I can put 2n, which will target every second list item as green. So if I refresh, you'll see 1, 3, 5, and 7, which is every second list item is now green. In other words, I'm targeting even list items. I can target odd elements by simply adding a +1 here, so that when n is 0, 2 times 0 is 0 plus 1, so the first item will be green. When n is 1, 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3, so every third item will be green. When n is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, so every fifth item will be green, etc. So if I refresh, so you'll now see that every odd list item, starting here, is styled green. And not that you'd ever need to do this, but you can start making up your own linear equations in here. For example, I could do 3n plus 2. So if I refresh, when n is 0, we get 3 times 0 plus 2, so the second list item is styled. When n is 1, 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5, so the fifth list item is green. Anyways, I just wanted to show you these conditional pseudo-classes. Don't let them freak you out. We're not really going to be using them at all. The state pseudo-classes on our anchor tags are way more important. Let's finish off this video by starting to build the next summary card, pseudo-classes and specificity. In this video, we looked at pseudo-classes. A pseudo-class works by having a selector, like the anchor tag, and following it with a colon and a pseudo-class name, like hover. This gives us a pseudo-class. We saw that there were two different types of pseudo-classes. There was a state pseudo-class, which is very important, and this is where styling is based on user interaction. And we saw a common use case was targeting anchor tags, like buttons, where we would often group the link and visited pseudo-classes, as well as group the hover and active pseudo-classes. We then also looked at conditional pseudo-classes, and these were less important, as we don't use them as often as state pseudo-classes. Conditional pseudo-classes is when styling is based on an element's relative position. And we saw an example of an nth-child pseudo-class, and can be used to target every odd or even list row. Don't forget, you can download all the summary cards and presentation slides from the bootcamp in the link in the description below. Thanks for watching. I'm working super hard to build up this channel and release new videos each week. It would mean a lot if you could subscribe by clicking here. And click here to move on to the next video in the playlist.